صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. During the month of Ramadan, as Shayk Faizi mentioned a few days ago in the Jummah khutbah, we have this tradition here at Baitul Ilm to go through a lecture that's focused on Quran so that we can use the opportunity of the month of Ramadan and the gatherings to also further our understanding of Allah's Word. This year, in the 15 days that I have with you, the topic I want to look at is this concept of nifaq. Nifaq, usually translated as hypocrisy. Munafiqeen are mentioned in the Quran, and they play a really significant role in the Quranic message. And I think sometimes we think of them only in historical terms, that there were these people in Medina long ago and they caused some trouble, and for that reason there are all these verses in the Quran. But actually it's a very relevant and very useful topic for us to think about for ourselves. I'm going to share some verses, some ahadith with you today, and the takeaway I want you to come away with today is just to realize this is a significant topic that we need to spend some time on. We read Dua al-Iftitah, and one of the phrases towards the end of that, we make this dua and we ask Allah, when we say Allahumma inna narghabu ilayka fi dawlatin karimatin tu'izzu biha al-islam wa ahla wa tudhillu biha nifaqa wa ahla. Right, so we're praying for this culmination of civilization that will come at the end of time at the hand of Imam al-Hujjah, salawatullahi alayhi. And this will be the final fulfillment of what Allah has wanted for humanity all along. And He says, we pray and we ask Allah to make this government of His such that Islam and those who follow Islam are ennobled and raised high. And then the opposite of that, the opposite of Islam that we want Allah to push down and to wipe out, is not kufr or shirk, as oftentimes we think of the opposite of Islam would be kufr. It is in some context, that's also a correct opposition between those two. But really the dangerous kind of thing that we have to watch out for is nifaq. And that's what we're praying for, that Allah will make that government of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam such that nifaq and munafiqeen, who are those who espouse this nifaq, they will be suppressed and finally wiped out. The word munafiq and nifaq has an interesting etymology. So we have some interesting dictionaries. In Arabic, some dictionaries are like English dictionaries where you look up a word and you find the meaning. But oftentimes the lexicographers who wrote these dictionaries, they had interesting lives. They were around in a time when Arabic was fading. When you think of the Quran, we always talk about the eloquence of the Quran, that this was the epitome of this Arabic language. But the irony of Islam is that as soon as Islam came in on the stage, it was the downfall of Arabic. Why? Because one of the keys to keeping a language pure is that the status quo remains. You should only have like a very isolated bubble of people all talking this pure language. As soon as you have a foreigner coming in and you have exchange of culture and exchange of language, then necessarily the language is going to get diluted. And you end up with evolution of language, which is a normal thing that happens. English is a living testament to that. Think of the melting pot of language is there in English, right? But it's not a pure language. It's not quite German, it's not quite a Romance language, it's some hodgepodge of all these different things. And so Arabic became that as well. And so these lexicographers would go out into the deserts, into the tribal areas where there is still some purity of language. Because in the cities where Muslims and Persians and Egyptians and Byzantines, all these people were coming and mixing, the language was getting destroyed. And so they go out into the desert and find nomadic tribes and listen to their poetry and write it all down. Ask them, what do you say for this? What do you say for that? How do you use this word? Like when you say this in this poetry, what does it mean? And they would come up with an understanding of the words and write those down. And we have these dictionaries from around the second and third centuries of the Hijrah. So with this particular word, the origin that they were able to find for nifaq and munafiqeen is this very kind of strange, like zoological phenomenon. So there's some sort of desert mouse, a jerboa, and it digs a hole, and in that hole it goes down into its nest so it can reside down there. And so it has this main hole that it uses to come in and out, but it digs a backup hole just in case. There's a backup hole somewhere else that's concealed and it's actually not even exposed. He digs it almost all the way up until he's near the surface and then leaves it. Just in case a snake or something comes to attack from this side, it can escape and it bursts through that small opening and then it can escape like that. So this back way, this concealed way, is called a nafiqa. And they say that's the origin of this word nifaq, because the munafiq is really a two-faced person. That's the essence of it. And we think of it as hypocrite. Hypocrite might be, there are people who are hypocritical it's very easy to see that. But one of the things I want us to come away with this from this discussion is to understand that munafiq is not a clear-cut category. You have Muslim, you have kafir. These are terms that come into our fiqh. There's a legal definition for them. It's easy to define a person who's Muslim is simply someone who says shahadatain. That's it. The law can identify that. Okay, if you say shahadatain, now whether you believe it or not, how much you believe it, how much you practice based on that belief, that's a separate question. That's between you and God. That's your spirituality. That's the reality of who you are. But for citizenship as a Muslim, this simple shahadatain is enough to make you Muslim. Kufr is also easy. You can define kufr, anyone who doesn't believe, has not said shahadatain, is kafir. Right? Sometimes we think of kafir as only the worst and the most evil of kuffar or kafir. But kufr simply means non-Muslim. If you don't say the shahadatain, then you're kafir. So that's easy to define those two and distinguish between the two. Munafiq is very challenging though. Right? A munafiq, by definition, it's somebody who is Muslim. Right? So it's a subset of Muslims. But there are Muslims who, in their heart, in their mind, they don't accept the major tenets of the faith, all or some. Right? So they have not only a doubt, they don't believe in some part of Islam while they profess it. So this is where the two-facedness comes in. They profess Islam, they claim to be Muslim, they identify as Muslim, they are amongst us, they are us. But there's a disease in their heart. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ marad. That's one of the expressions in the Quran for these kinds of people. There's a sickness in their heart that is not just questions and doubts. Innocent questions and doubts are actually excellent springboards towards understanding, curiosity, and learning. Theirs is not curiosity and doubt, there is a kind of arrogance that goes with it. And there's a difference between agnostics and atheists in the same way. An atheist says there is no God. He has iman, yaqeen, that there is no God. It's baseless because the most evidence that they can come up with is to say that there is no evidence of a God, therefore there is no God. But logically that's not sound. Absence of evidence of something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. At most you can say, I haven't been able to understand the need for a God or why I should believe there's a God. So the agnostic is actually a lot humbler and has a more defensible position. Because they're not making a statement that I don't believe, they're simply saying I don't know and maybe I can't know. Right, so this munafiq has this kind of disease in him that he feels some need or some benefit to being amongst Muslims, but at the same time he, in his heart, is against Islam, and wants to undermine Islam and undermine Muslims and their causes and their happiness and all of the things that they want. But one of the key takeaways is that it's not an all or nothing thing. Like, being Muslim is clear, being kafir is clear. Being munafiq or having nifaq within you is not a clear category that you say this person is now munafiq. And we can label, he comes out and says, yes, I say I'm Muslim, but I'm not really Muslim. Nobody claims that. Nobody's going to say that. It would undermine his whole facade if he comes out and says that, yes, I say I'm Muslim, but I'm actually not Muslim. I don't believe in any of this. So nifaq is actually a gradient. There are levels of nifaq that we should be on guard for because they could be within ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to understand this nifaq as a real, potent, relevant concept for us. It's not that historical Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul in Medina, he's the only munafiq. Our commentators of Quran, oftentimes whenever munafiqun is mentioned, Surah Al-Munafiqun, if you look at the commentary, it says it's all about Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul and his people. There's one individual who was about to become king because he was so popular in Medina. Between the two tribes of Khazraj and Aus, they all agreed that this guy is a good leader. And they were about to crown him king of Medina, of Yathrib, right when the Prophet's hijrah happened. And so the Prophet coming on the scene and now being the solution to all the strife and consolidating a government and bringing peace and all of this was actually a stab in the back of this Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. And so he felt that this Muhammad coming has undermined all of my aspirations. And for that reason, he felt that, yes, I'll follow with everyone else and become Muslim like everyone else because that's the thing to do. I can't stand out as a mushrik when everyone else is now Muslim. But he had this deep-seated enmity because of this grudge. And it lasted till the end. However, he's not the only munafiq. One of the deceptions that's happened in Islamic scholarship is that by calling out this one Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul and saying he's the munafiq. Whenever the Quran talks about munafiqeen and hypocrites, it's always this guy. What it does is it focuses all of our attention on this one individual who's historical, who lived way back then, who didn't really have much significance, who didn't really do anything except cause a little bit of trouble for the Prophet. And that's it. Now, once he's dead, then those verses are also gone with him. Munafiqeen, that's not an important concept for us. Nifaq, we don't have to worry about that. It's all gone. It's in history. It has nothing to do with me. All I have to deal with is iman and maybe kufr. When the reality is that no, this nifaq is not only that one person. And this is one of the deceptions, focusing all of our attention on this one person distracts us away from all of the munafiqeen amongst the companions of the Prophet. That's a problem historically. And that also distracts us away from the possibility of levels of nifaq existing within ourselves. So inshallah, as we go through, we'll look at different verses, especially from Surah At-Tawbah, because that's one of the places in the Quran that speaks about munafiqeen a lot. And we'll see that the characteristics of munafiqeen are not something out there that other people have. إِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالًا. Just as one example, that's one of the attributes that Allah mentions for munafiqeen. That when they stand for prayer, they stand lazily. That's clearly not somebody else's problem. That's my problem and your problem. When have we not, the prayer times come around, and when have we not said, oh, I have to pray again. Or it's, I have to stop this other thing I was doing which was important or enjoyable or something, and I have to go pray. And even for a second, maybe we didn't say it, maybe we didn't make the sound, but just in our mind, if we had that sense that there's a little bit of heaviness within us, instead of the eagerness with which we should be jumping towards prayer, waiting for prayer, right, that kind of alacrity that we're supposed to have for prayer, when that's not there, then there's some level of laziness within us, some level of hesitation within us. That's a seed of nifaq. That's right there within us, not in someone else, historically or outside of me, but it could be within me. And if it doesn't get checked, if I don't recognize it, if I don't call myself out and say, wait, I can't do that. The prayer is everything. This is the standard of my entire life and the worth of me. If I'm hesitant, if I'm lazy, if I'm at all grudging this prayer, then that's a serious problem with me. If I don't call myself out on that, then that can grow and fester, and as it becomes harder and harder in life, as you get older, to change yourself, then it becomes very difficult to change afterwards. It's better to recognize it early on, call yourself out, recognize it, get help, make dua, ask Allah to reform this within you and work on it yourself, so that you can get rid of that little seed of laziness before it grows into something more dangerous. Recite with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's one statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. So Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, he mentions this to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, I believe, when he's sending him off as governor of Egypt. So in his admonishment to him, one of the things he says is he quotes this hadith that he heard Rasulullah say. قال رسول الله قال لي رسول الله إني لا أخاف على أمتي مؤمنا ولا مشركا. So Imam Ali is quoting that Rasulullah said that my fear for my ummah is not with regard to the mu'min and the mushrik. What I fear as this ummah grows is not the believer and the mushrik. Why? He says, أَمَّا الْمُؤْمِنْ فَيَمْنَعُهُ اللَّهُ بِإِيمَانِهِ. That mu'min has iman within him, and because of that iman within him, Allah will protect him. Right? So the iman, the faith of the believer, Allah will use that faith to protect the believer against deviation. وَأَمَّا الْمُشْرِكْ فَيَقْمَعُهُ اللَّهُ بِشِرْكِهِ. The mushrik also has the seed of kufr, of rejection of the one God, association of partners with Allah, or thinking of himself as a partner of God. Right? Sometimes our arrogance is an equal to God. If I do what I want and don't do what Allah wants, then in reality I'm mushrik. Right? Allah is the one who should be obeyed. If I'm obeying my own self, my own nafs, instead of obeying Allah, then at that level I become mushrik. Right? That's another. We shouldn't think of mushrik only as the Hindu and the Buddhist and those people out there. Like shirk is another one of those gradated concepts. That yes, there are obvious forms of shirk where a person is bowing down to a stone idol that he's carved with his own hands. That's the obvious shirk. But there are levels of shirk that all of us could have, probably do have. وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ, Allah says. Not a single one of them believes in God, but that he also does shirk alongside that. Right? So these are things that we have to reflect on to see. Like when I'm sinning, I know what's right and I decide not to do it. Allah tells me to do something, I say, no, I don't want to. So what's the reality of that? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. I become like that. I've made my own hawa, my own desire, not to do that thing, at least an equal. In fact, I've already even put it a notch up because I'm listening to my nafs and I'm not listening to Allah. That's shirk. Right? So these concepts are actually living concepts that we all have to think about and examine ourselves and see what level of nifaq do I have? Where do I fall on the spectrum of shirk? Is there levels of shirk that I have with myself? I need to work on those things. I need to get rid of those things to become more and more purely muwahhid, purely monotheistic. So Rasulullah says that mushrik has that seed of shirk within him, and because of that, Allah will knock him down. It's a clear dividing line between the mu'min and the mushrik. So the Prophet says, I'm not worried about these two. The mu'min will succeed because of the iman he has, the mushrik will fail because of the shirk that he has. وَلَكِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ كُلَّ مُنَافِقِ الْجَنَانِ عَالِمِ الْلِسَانِ. The thing that I'm scared about for my ummah is this person who has this two-facedness in his heart. Janan is heart. Jinan is the plural of Jannah. The Jannah, Jinan, like Mafatihul Jinan, with a kasra on the jim. That's for gardens or paradises and those kinds of things. But Janan means the heart. So munafiqul janan is a person who has this hypocrisy, this two-facedness within his heart. That's what the Prophet says I'm scared of. And worse, partnering with the corruption and that two-facedness in his heart is the fact that he's alimul lisan. He has a good tongue to be able to speak eloquently, to be able to convince people of what he's thinking in his heart. Because again, a person can be crooked on the inside, have this maradul qalb, a sickness in his heart, and if it's just he and himself, and he's in his own mind with his own corruption, his own deceptions, he's in a bad place, but at least he's not spreading the disease to others. But to the extent that we're able to communicate those wrong ideas to people and even convince them of those ideas, now we become a danger to society. So this munafiq in his heart is so much more dangerous when he becomes eloquent with his tongue. And the Prophet says, that's what I'm scared of. يَقُولُ مَا تَعْرِفُونَ وَيَفْعَلُ مَا تُنْكِرُونَ. This kind of person, when he speaks, you recognize what he's saying. He says all the right things. The same things that you and I say. He says salam, we say salam. We say shahada, he says shahada. We pray, he prays. All these, there's so much commonality, we feel like, yeah, there's a resonance between me and him. But then you see his actions, and you realize that these are things I don't recognize. This kind of sin, this kind of rebellion, this kind of, trying to corrupt Islam from within, trying to misguide people, trying to spread or sow seeds of doubt in people's minds. These kinds of things I don't recognize. So that's the danger of this munafiq. He's amongst us, he's within us, and for that reason we need to be very keenly aware of what it is, what it looks like, what are the characteristics of nifaq, so that we can be on our guard, first and foremost within ourselves, to see those seeds of nifaq and recognize them, get rid of them, and then even within our community. Again, it's not an all or nothing thing. We're not saying once we learn these standards that we can call out and say, okay, you're a munafiq, you're a munafiq, you're a munafiq, and separate people. That never happened in the time of the Prophet. Again, munafiq is not a concept, it's not a title that you can label someone with. And then there's any sort of fiqhi repercussions for it. Muslim, kafir, you can label someone based on very clear parameters. Munafiq is this continuum. And the reason we see the Prophet never had a war against the munafiqeen. He never called them out. Even we have incidences, I'll tell you the detailed story, but this incident of Aqaba, where some of these munafiqeen lay in wait for the Prophet to push him and his camel off of this precipice. He sends Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman ahead to kind of disperse them, to let them know that they've been found out, and they all run. Hudayfa, either he says he recognizes them, or the Prophet tells him that these are the names of these 12 people who are there. But he tells Hudayfa, you're not allowed to tell anyone. It's a secret. Right? The Prophet knew who they were. Hudayfa recognized them, or he knew also. But the Prophet tells him not to let people know. For some wisdom. We can guess and try to figure out what that wisdom is. But that's not the nature of this struggle against nifaq. It's not one that you have a jihad against. It's not one that you can call out and recognize it so easily. And because of that, it's so much harder to find, it's so much harder to fight against, because it's the shaitan within. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's another tradition that comes in Nahj al-Balagha in one form, but I'll quote it to you from Al-Kafi. Imam Ali alayhi salam says the following about the nature of truth and falsehood. He says, فَلَوْ أَنَّ الْبَاطِلَ خَلَصَ لَمْ يَخْفَى عَلَى ذِي حِجَةٍ. I'll read the next sentence too, because I think they're both related. وَلَوْ أَنَّ الْحَقَّ خَلَصَ لَمْ يَكُنْ اخْتِلَافٍ. So the nature, if you have truth and falsehood clearly delineated, when they're separate, and it's clear that we're Muslim, it's clear that this person is kafir. There's no question about the division between the two. Because we have a clear definition for what makes a Muslim, a clear definition for who else is a kafir, whoever's not a Muslim. So the line there is very clear. When truth and falsehood are clearly designated, and you know where truth is, you know where falsehood is, then there's no confusion. Anyone who has a mind to recognize can see that this is right and that's wrong. One God is right, any sort of shirk is wrong. Justice is right, dhulm is wrong. The prophets and their right to this position that Allah has given them is right. Anyone who challenges the prophets, rejects the prophets, fights against the prophets is wrong. And those things it's very clear what the line is, and as long as they're separate, then anyone with a mind can recognize one from the other. And then the lines of battle also between the two sides, the ones who follow truth and the ones who follow falsehood, that's also a very clear, open battle. There's a clear front for the battle, and you know exactly who's on your side, who's on that side, and the point of the fighting is also very clear. The problem comes, he says, وَلَكِنْ يُؤْخَذُ مِنْ هَذَا ضِغْطٌ وَمِنْ هَذَا ضِغْطٌ فَيُمْزَجَانِ فَيَجِيئَانِ مَعًا فَهُنَالِكَ اسْتَحْوَذَ الشَّيْطَانُ عَلَى أَوْلِيَائِهِ. He says the problem though is that in textbooks you have clear truth and clear falsehood. But what happens is that the munafiq type person, he's smart enough to know that if I just say batil all the time, then no one's going to follow me. Like, who would follow Muawiyah if he came out clearly and said that Muhammad was, God forbid, a liar, Ali is a liar, Hassan, the Quran is wrong? If he said all these things clearly, no one would follow him. How could he be Khalifatul Muslimin if this is his platform? He has to sell himself as a Muslim. He has to do what Muslims do. He has to speak like a Muslim. You read his letters, his correspondence with Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, it's very eloquent. You would expect him to, say, I hate this, and I'm angry at this, and have this kind of frothing mouth as he's talking. But one of the characteristics of the munafiq, it comes out in Surah Al-Munafiqun as well. Right? إِذَا رَأَيْتَهُمْ تُعْجِبُكَ أَجْسَامُهُمْ وَإِنْ يَقُولُوا تَسْمَعْ لِقَوْلِهِمْ. When this munafiq, when you look at them, they're beautiful, well-dressed, handsome, deep sonorous voice. They look the part. When they speak, they have such charisma that you want to listen to them. Right, that's the way these Ibn Ziyad and Yazid and Muawiyah, maybe Yazid might not have had the refinement of his father, but one of the reasons why Imam Hassan had to get into this position with Muawiyah to compromise was that he was so convincing in the act that so many people followed him. Even people who knew who Imam Hassan was, who were with him in his army, his own commanders. Ubaidullah ibn Abbas is the most infamous of them. The brother of Ibn Abbas, the cousin of Imam Hassan. Commander, and in one night, Muawiyah is able to finally get a sum of money high enough to buy him over. And he leaves. They wake up in the morning, the army comes in the morning to pray, and he's gone. And Qais ibn Sa'ad is left alone to lead the prayer. They had an army of 14,000, and it's left within one night at 4,000. Because Muawiyah was that convincing. Someone like that, Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas's brother, Ubaidullah ibn Abbas, could be convinced with money and with rumors that Imam Hassan is sold out, for instance, and he's already compromised and made his own deals and these kinds of things. He didn't have the strength to be able to resist all of that, and he gave in. That happens when someone's really charismatic, attractive, they play the part. That's one of the reasons I sometimes feel angry about the cartoons and sometimes even the movies that we create around Karbala, because we portray the villains as comic book villains, cartoonish villains, where you look at them and you can just see from the way they're dressed and the way their face is, and just there are all these little keys that tell you this person's evil. A better way to prepare ourselves or our kids, or whoever the audience is for those kinds of things, is to portray that person who's evil in the way that he actually was, as attractive, as charismatic, as eloquent as possible. For the simple mind, it was very hard to tell the difference between these two. Muawiyah and Hassan look the same to so many of the people. That will prepare us for the real world, because that's how nifaq works. It's only effective if يُؤْخَذُ مِنْ هَذَا الضِّغْث وَمِنْ هَذَا الضِّغْث. You take some falsehood, but you got to mix it with enough truth so that the mixture can pass for truth. Because nobody wants to willingly go for falsehood. No one wants to go for dhulm and evil. Nobody wants to do that. They have to first convince themselves that whatever they're doing is justified in some way. It's actually truth. Actually, no one else understands, and this is actually the right thing. They have to convince themselves in some way before they finally take it and say, okay, this is my position. When that happens, then shaitan comes in. Now the ground is prepared. Truth has been mixed with falsehood in just the right tincture that people are willing to buy. Now shaitan comes in and he pushes people over the edge, starts to rationalize in our mind, justify, to say, well, everyone else is doing it, so you can also do it. It's not that bad. It's mainly truth, a little bit of falsehood, but it's mainly truth, so go for it. All these kinds of ideas start to come in our mind. Now the ground is prepared for shaitan to have that full effect on us and get us to go over the edge. Recite wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All right, so this is our task for these 2 weeks, inshallah, that we have in front of us, to try to understand this concept. We'll go through some of these verses, see what those characteristics are. But we should realize that this is really important. When we think of like who's at the bottom of the pits of hell, right? We would think those kuffar, those mushrikeen, someone who, like the Quran tells us, the one sin that Allah is not willing to forgive is shirk. So we think, okay, the mushrik would be at the bottom of hell. The dhalim, the one who did the most crimes and these kinds of things, he would be at the bottom of hell. But what does Allah say? إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. Like the ones who are at the very bottom of hell, and the dark is the opposite of darj. You have darajat going up and darakat going down. So the furthest station down in the pit of hellfire is ad-darkul asfal. And he says that it's the munafiqeen who are there. They are so much more dangerous. They're the ones who, like, there's a chance that you and I can be taken in by them. The kafir is not going to fool us. The mushrik's not going to fool us. But it's that munafiq and those nifaqi ideas that can get into us and also bring us along. And that's what we really have to worry about. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to understand the teachings of Quran in this month of Quran. Help us, Allah, to particularly understand this idea of nifaq, and help us to root out the last vestiges of nifaq from ourselves and purify our community and the worldwide community of Shia and Muslims of nifaq. And bring us to the time when Imam al-Hujjah will come back and he will totally eliminate nifaq from the world. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Let's finish by reciting the ziyarah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام ولك السلام وإليك يعود السلام. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين. السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين. السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي. عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. السلام عليكم جميعا أهل بيت النبوة ورحمة الله وبركاته.